He's co-authored the #1 New York Times bestseller, Extreme Ownership, How U.S. Navy SEALs Lead and Win. So please welcome Jocko Willink.
I guess you already gave me a nice round of applause. It's all downhill from there, I'm afraid. So I'm going to talk to you about leadership. It says combat leadership up there. I'm sure some of you are wondering, wait a second, we're not in combat. But I think you're going to realize that these principles that we learned on the battlefield, that we trained, that we teach today, they apply to everything that you do, yes, on the battlefield, but also in business, and you're going to see in life as well. So, I spent my adult life in the SEAL teams. That's what I did, and a lot of times people, when they think of the SEAL teams, what they think of is this stuff here. It's that training that you see on TV. We got a bunch of guys that are running around with boats on their heads and carrying logs around and being wet and cold and miserable and tired. And a lot of people quit when you go through that SEAL training. All they have to do is ring that bell right there and you're out. Well, I didn't quit. I made it through that training. And when I made it through that training, I went to SEAL Team 1. And when I went to SEAL Team 1, it was 1991. I had just missed the first Gulf War, which kind of made me sad because my whole life I wanted to be some kind of commando, and a big war happened and I missed the whole thing. So what do you do? What do you do when you're on a SEAL team and there's no war going on? Well, what you do, you train, right? You train, and then you train some more, and then you train some more, and then you train some more. A lot of training, but I don't want to make it sound that bad. Because the training that you're doing is shooting machine guns, jumping out of airplanes, and blowing things up. Pretty much awesome. But we still weren't doing sort of what I had joined the Navy to do, which was go and do real missions. When we would go on deployment, we would train other host nations on how to do this stuff. So eventually, when I was at SEAL Team 1, which is in San Diego, California, I got picked up for a commissioning program, which meant I was going to become an officer and become a leader inside the SEAL teams. And when that happened, I went from SEAL Team 1 in San Diego out to SEAL Team 2 in Virginia Beach. And when I got out there, this is where I did my first real missions as a SEAL. So I was now an assistant platoon commander, and there were sanctions against Iraq at the time. And that meant that a lot of people were smuggling stuff in and out of Iraq, and most of the stuff that they were smuggling was on the waterways. And so somebody had to stop those smugglers, and that somebody was us, because it was out in the Persian Gulf. And so what we would do, sometimes you can see that bottom left picture there, it's a big oil tanker. So sometimes we would go and take down these big oil tankers. We'd come in the middle of the night with helicopters and slide down ropes on them, and then storm the bridge and get control of the vessel and turn it over to the authorities with millions of dollars worth of oil on. And so that would feel pretty good. But most of the time we were taking down these smaller little boats that you see on the bottom right there. They're called dhows. They're very common over in the Persian Gulf. And since they're a lot smaller, instead of taking helicopters, we would just take our own boats. And we would drive our own boats alongside those boats, and we had ladders that we had made that we'd hook alongside like pirates, and we'd climb aboard, and we'd get control of those little ships, and then we'd search the cargo. And 99% of the time, what they were smuggling was actually, it was dates. You know what those are? Yeah. They're basically big giant raisins. So that was our big mission in the SEAL teams, to go out and capture these giant raisins. Not exactly what I joined the SEAL teams to do, but that was our mission. So we did it to the best of our ability. I got done with that deployment, and to be an officer in the military, you have to go to college. I hadn't been to college yet, and so I took that opportunity to go back to San Diego and go to college in San Diego. That was my only job, was just to go to college. I was definitely the highest paid college freshman of all time. And that's all I had to do, was go to college. I was married. I got to get a house down by the beach and hang out with my family and go to class sometimes. And it was really just an opportunity for me to enjoy everything that San Diego and California, and really just a time to enjoy everything that America has to offer. And it was an awesome time. And then this happened. So our country's attacked. There's fear. There's terror. There's thousands of innocent civilians dead, and there is uncertainty about the future. For everyone except for me and my friends and those of us that were in the military at the time, we are now certain of one thing, and that is that we were going to war. And the war kicked off in Afghanistan, and very quickly thereafter, the war shifted focus over to Iraq. And I now got back to a SEAL team, and once I was back in a SEAL team, was watching the initial war kick off in Iraq, the air war, the shock and awe, the ground troops pushing up into Baghdad, the regime getting toppled. Seemed like the war was going to be over very quickly. Luckily for me, in the fall of 2003, I deployed to Baghdad, where I was a SEAL platoon commander. And what we were doing was something that we called direct action or capture kill missions. And what this meant was we would gather intelligence from various sources to find out the location of a bad guy. Once we knew the location of the bad guy, we would load up our Humvees in the middle of the night. We would drive to the vicinity where that bad guy was. We would dismount the Humvees a couple blocks away because Humvees make a lot of noise. We didn't want the enemy to know we were coming. We would foot patrol the last block or two to the enemy location. Just about every building in Iraq has like a 6 to 8 foot wall around it. So we had built little 2x4 ladders. We'd put those ladders up against the wall. We'd climb inside the compound. We'd put a big giant explosive breaching charge on their door. We'd step back. We'd blast the door open. Then we'd go inside that building, we'd clear the building, we'd grab the bad guy, we'd bring the bad guy back to our base, we would interrogate the bad guy, we'd find out where his friends were, and then we'd go get his friends. And it was awesome. It was awesome. That's what I wanted to do my whole life. That's what we were trained to do. That's what we were ready to do. And at this time, the enemy was a bunch of just disorganized thugs and former regime elements that were running around causing problems. So they were like an easy target for us. And we did our mission, we high-fived, and felt like we did a great job. When we got back to America, we thought the war was going to be over pretty quick. But as we watched what was happening in Iraq at the time, we started to hear a new word being used to describe what was happening in Iraq, and that new word was insurgency. And what that meant was that these former regime elements and these former criminals and thugs that had been running around causing problems, now they were getting organized. Now they were getting financed, and most important, now they were being led. And they were starting to conduct very serious operations and attacks against coalition forces. And what did America do? As the enemy started to step up their attacks, what we did was we went and kind of went back to these big bases that we had built, big reinforced bases that we had built. And as we stayed on these big reinforced bases that we had built, the enemy got more aggressive. The enemy started to take the fight to us. And nowhere was this more evident than in a city in western Iraq, the capital of Al-Anbar province, a city called Ramadi. And if you remember this time period, this is 2005, 2006, when you would watch the news at night, just about every night on the news you would see that there was 2 Marines killed in Al-Anbar province, or 3 soldiers killed in Al-Anbar province, or 4 Marines wounded in Al-Anbar province. Well, the vast majority of those casualties were right here in the capital city of Ramadi. Ramadi was a total war zone. In fact, Ramadi was so bad that there was a military intelligence report that got leaked to the press. And what this report said, it painted a grim picture of what was happening in Ramadi and in Al-Anbar province. I got a quote up there from this report, written by a Marine Corps lieutenant colonel. It said the social and political situation has deteriorated to a point that U.S. and Iraqi troops are no longer capable of militarily defeating the insurgency in Al-Anbar. And this report went on to say that Ramadi and Anbar province were all but lost. And if you remember this time frame as well, There was people in America that were saying this was an unwinnable situation. There were people in our own government that were saying this was a quagmire, this was another Vietnam, and there was no way we could win. Well, when I come home from my first deployment to Iraq, where I was in charge of one SEAL platoon, when I got back, I got put in charge of 2 SEAL platoons. 2 SEAL platoons combined together is called a task unit. My task unit was called Task Unit Bruiser, and we found out right before we were going on deployment that we were deploying into the belly of the beast, into the city of Ramadi. And when we got there, there was a National Guard unit that was on the ground. If you know what a National Guard unit is, National Guard, these are reservists. These are people that are part-time soldiers. And they have regular jobs as plumbers and teachers and electricians and whatever else. And then one weekend a year, or one weekend a month, two weeks in the summertime, they go and play soldier. Well, when we got to Ramadi, these part-time soldiers had been on the ground fighting in the worst city in Iraq for 14 months. And they had done an incredible job of taking the fight to the enemy. And what they had done is they kind of surrounded the outskirts of the city. But the city itself was still almost completely controlled by the enemy. The map on the right-hand side, those areas that are shaded in red, those are areas that there was almost no coalition presence whatsoever. But like I said, the National Guard had done a great job getting containment around this city. Well, after we showed up, it was actually time for that National Guard unit to go back home. And a new group came in to take their place. And the group that came in to take their place was called the 11 AD. And AD stands for Armored Division. And what that means is that they had tanks. And if you don't know anything about tanks, there's a picture of one right there. And just to give you some context, the vehicle that you drive probably weighs 2 or 3 tons. That tank right there weighs 68 tons. It's just a massive metal machine of total destruction. And it also is, to me, one of the most beautiful things that mankind has ever invented. And the reason I say that is because when my guys were in the city of Ramadi and they were under the threat of being overrun by the enemy, it was these tanks. And it was the soldiers and Marines that drove these tanks that came to my guys' rescue over and over again. Now, I also have the word "we" written up there. Because as I stand up here and say we did this and we did that and we did something else, I want to make it crystal clear that I'm absolutely not just talking about the 40 SEALs that I had with me. This was a team effort. This was not just us. This was this brigade of 5,600 soldiers and Marines, and they did the bulk of the heavy fighting, and they did the bulk of the heavy lifting, and we were humbled and honored to be able to support them. Now, the 11 AD not only came with these tanks, which were awesome, they also came with a new strategy, which they called seize, clear, hold, and build. And what that meant was they were going to go into these enemy-controlled territories and stay there. And let the local populace know that we were there to support them. Because although there was insurgents inside the city of Ramadi, most of the people there were normal people that just wanted to live their lives. They just wanted a stable city. They just wanted peace. And we moved into these neighborhoods to support them. Now, as I heard about what the strategy was to go into these enemy-controlled territories and stay there, I had to figure out how we as SEALs could support that. Because they had to go into these enemy neighborhoods and build combat outposts. Build secure combat outposts, which is a big construction project with concrete walls being brought down and concertina wire being put up and electrical systems being put inside these buildings. It's a big construction project, and as SEALs, we're not construction guys. So as they were doing that operation, which was very dangerous in the city, I knew that the best thing that we could do was try and protect those soldiers and Marines. And so that's what we would do. We would set up what we call sniper overwatch positions in areas where the enemy would not expect us to be. And when the enemy would maneuver in to attack these combat outposts, we would then interdict and eliminate the enemy. These are some of the combat outposts that we put in. So this is what it looked like over time. This is a bigger map of Ramadi. You can see those areas that are shaded in red, almost completely controlled by the enemy. There's one road down the middle of Ramadi. It was called Route Michigan. And even with those blue spotches on there, those are American checkpoints. Even with those checkpoints on there, this road was the most heavily attacked road in all of Iraq, with 7 to 10 roadside bombs on it a day. So we started putting in these combat outposts, which are represented by those little blue circles. And as we put these combat outposts in, the areas that were shaded in red started to turn green, meaning we got control of them, meaning we started to pacify those areas. And then the areas outside a little further started to become more passive. They turned yellow, meaning there was more and more pacification there. And finally, we had these combat outposts in most of the neighborhoods in the city. We kind of had the enemy surrounded that last little area in the center of Ramadi. And of course, once we had that last little area, we figured we'd put one more combat outpost right in their last stand. And when we did that, I thought there was going to be a major fight because we had the enemy surrounded. And I figured that they would fight like cornered animals. Well, believe it or not, we put in that last combat outpost, and my SEALs didn't fire a single shot. And why is that? It's because all the enemy was either dead or they had fled the city of Ramadi. And that was my first indication that there was a radical transformation that was about to take place in the city of Ramadi. And we didn't get to see it with our own eyes because they were still fighting when we left. But when we got back to America, we finished our deployment and we started to get pictures from the SEALs that took our place. And we couldn't really believe the changes in the city of Ramadi. So the pictures on the left, I apologize that they're small. The pictures on the left, that's pictures of what Ramadi was like when I was there. There was blown up buildings, there was vehicles burning in the streets. It was a total war zone. The pictures on the right are the pictures that we got sent back from the SEALs that replaced us. And again, the top picture on the right, that's a Marine and an Iraqi policeman out in the city of Ramadi playing soccer with kids. When we were there, the kids wouldn't even go in the streets because it was too dangerous. And here they were playing soccer. The second picture on the right, in the middle, that's a picture of a girls' school. Now, if you know anything about the tenets of Al-Qaeda's brand of Islam, they're not exactly pro-women's education. All right, they don't even think that women should know how to read. But the local populace inside Ramadi, they didn't want that. They wanted their daughters to be educated. They wanted them to have a shot at a better life. And so coalition forces helped them build this school. And there it was in downtown Ramadi, these young Iraqi girls going to school and getting an education. But what really made me realize this transformation was this bottom picture on the right. And again, I apologize that it's small and it's hard to see what it is. But if you take a look at it, squint your eyes a little bit, you can see it kind of looks like a road race. It's a road race. It's a road race that the citizens of Ramadi organized and ran, and they did it right down Route Michigan without a single incident of violence. And when I saw that picture, and I saw the rest of these pictures, and I read these reports, that's when I knew. That's when I knew that despite every naysayer that was out there, despite all the people that said this was an unwinnable situation, when I saw those pictures, I knew that victory had absolutely been achieved in the city of Ramadi. But for every victory, there's a price to be paid. There's a cost. And the cost for victory in the Battle of Ramadi was absolutely immense. And in the 6 months that we were there with the 11 AD, they lost 9 of those Abrams main battle tanks. They lost 15 Bradley fighting vehicles, which is like a smaller tank. They lost 34 Humvees. They had almost 500 wounded in action. And in just those 6 months we were there with them, they had 61 killed in action. And of those 61 killed in action, from our task unit bruiser, we lost Mark Lee, who I know you're all familiar with. The first SEAL killed in Iraq. Just an unbelievable human being. Someone that we all thought would live forever. We lost Mikey Mansour, who was the second SEAL killed in Iraq. Who was a devout Catholic. Michael, named after St. Michael. And on September 29th, 2006, he jumped on a grenade to save 3 of our other teammates. And September 29th, you might know, or you might recognize as St. Michael's Day. And finally, Ryan Job, who was shot in the face, was gravely wounded, was rendered blind by the damage that was done, but who made it back to America, was medically retired from the Navy, and who, after his 22nd surgery to repair the damage that was done to his face and to his head, there were complications. And Ryan died as well. So what do you bring home from a deployment like that? Well, one thing that you bring home is you bring home a burden. Especially from a leadership perspective, when you're flying home to San Diego, and you know you're going to see your friends again, you know you're going to see your family again, and you know you're just going to go ahead and carry on with the rest of your life. But you also know that you didn't bring home all your men. And that's something you're going to live with. And that's something those families are going to live with. And that's something that's never going to go away. But you also have to bring home something positive. You have to bring home something good. And for me, the best thing that we brought home from the Battle of Ramadi was the lessons that we learned. Lessons that we learned about humility and ownership and teamwork. And the lessons we learned about leadership. And when I talk about leadership, I'm not just talking about me because I was in charge of the task unit, or the brigade commander because he was in charge of everybody, or the platoon commander because he was in charge of a platoon. I'm talking about every level of leadership, right down to that frontline SEAL that's not even in charge of any other people, but takes ownership of his part of the mission and executes. And we learned without a shred of doubt that leadership is the most important thing on the battlefield. And when I came home from this deployment, I took over the training for the West Coast SEAL teams. Not the training that you see on TV where the guys are carrying telephone poles around. No one cares about that kind of training. in the SEAL teams. I took over the advanced training, the training where SEALs learn to shoot, move, and communicate. We learn how to maneuver elements on the battlefield, and most important, where you learn leadership. And when I took over that training, the very first training mission I went on to observe a SEAL platoon was a total disaster. It was a complete failure. No one knew what was happening. Everyone's getting shot with paintball. No decisions are being made. And as I watched this platoon fall apart during this training exercise, I realized that the reason they were falling apart is because the leaders did not know how to lead. And I went back to my barracks room that night, and I ended up writing down what I call the laws of combat. Because I knew I had to take what I had learned throughout my career, the lessons that had crystallized during the Battle of Ramadi, I needed to distill those down into something that these young SEAL leaders could easily understand and then implement in their platoons. So here they are: cover, move, simple, prioritize, and execute, and decentralized command. So I'm going to start off with cover, move. Cover, move. Cover, move is a gunfighting tactic. That's what it is. It's a gunfighting tactic. And when I first started working with companies, I wasn't even sure if I was going to teach this because businesses aren't in the business of gunfighting. So how does this make sense? Well, let me explain it to you first. What's your name? Kevin. All right, so check this out. Kevin and I are on a mission. There's some bad guys in a building across the street. We want to take down that building and take out those bad guys. So here's what we're going to do. First thing we're going to do is I'm going to start shooting. As I'm shooting, what are the bad guys doing? Yeah, they're ducking. They're trying to hide. So I'm shooting at the bad guys. Their heads are down. That gives Kevin the opportunity to get up and move to a better position. Once Kevin's in a better position, he starts shooting at the bad guys. While he's shooting at the bad guys, I get up and I move to a better position. Once I get to a better position, I start shooting again. Kevin can move. And that's what we do. We cover and move for each other until we get close enough to the bad guys to take them out and take down the building. That's cover and move. It's teamwork. Now, what happens if I'm shooting and Kevin is up and moving and I decide, I'm actually kind of thirsty right now. And I put my weapon down and I get out my canteen to take a drink. Now what do the bad guys do? Now they look up and they see Kevin. And guess what they do to Kevin? Now they shoot him. Because they're bad guys. So now, think about this. I might be thinking to myself, oh, that's too bad for Kevin. Oh, that's definitely too bad for Kevin. But guess what? It's not only Kevin that loses. Because now I've lost my support. So now the bad guys cover and move on me. So when one part of the team fails, it's not just that part of the team that fails, it is the whole team that fails. We have to work together. And in order to work together, we have to build a relationship. And I know no one expects the Navy SEAL to come in here and talk to you about building relationships, but if you want cover and move to work, you got to build relationships. I got to know what Kevin needs from me. He's got to know what I need from him. I've got to give him support so that he can support me. You know those tanks that I showed you that I told you rescued my guys over and over again? Guess what? They didn't work for me. I couldn't order them to do anything. Matter of fact, they're in a totally different chain of command. They're in the Army, I'm in the Navy, they're in conventional forces, I'm in special operations. Our chain of command didn't even touch. And yet they would risk their lives to go out and help my guys. What was that based on? It was based on the relationships that we had. So that's what you have to do. You have to go out and you have to build relationships, not just within your own team, but with everybody that you work with, so that you can all cover and move for each other. That's the first law of combat. Second law of combat leadership is keep things simple. We got to keep things simple. And I used to get these young SEAL officers coming into the SEAL teams, and they just got out of college, went through the basic training, they had big giant brains. And I would say, hey, go come up with a plan for this training mission. And they'd leave for 4 or 5 hours. They'd come back and they'd present this plan to me, the most crazy, complex plan they've ever seen in your life. And they had a look on their face like it was the most brilliant plan ever. I would look at the plan and I'd say, this is horrible. And I would see the dejected look on their face and I'd say, hey, let's here's what's going on. The best plan and the most brilliant plan is the plan that is so simple and so clear that every single person on the team understands what the plan is. So you've got to have a simple plan. And then they come up with a more simple plan, they go out on a training mission, they come back and they say, dude, my guys aren't doing what I told them to do. And I'd say, well, gee, what do you think could possibly be wrong with them? And they'd say, well, I don't know. And I'd say, do you think that they're stupid? And they'd say, no. I'd say, do you think that they're deaf and can't hear you? And they'd say, no. And I'd say, what do you think could possibly be wrong with your team then? And they'd say, I don't know. And I'd say, that's because it's not your team. It's you. If your team isn't doing what it is you want them to do, the very first person you should check is yourself. To make sure that you are giving instructions and giving direction in a simple, clear, concise manner that everybody on the team can understand. Because if the team doesn't understand what the plan is, or they don't understand how you communicate it to them, there is no possible way that they can execute. So you have to keep it simple. That leads us to the third law of combat leadership: prioritize and execute. So, guess what? When I took over this training, I went through great lengths to make the training as realistic as possible. We did all kinds of crazy things. We used these really high-speed paintball guns that were your real gun, but they had a different attachment to them so they would shoot paint. And then I went to Hollywood and got Hollywood set designers to come down and make our training sites look like they were villages in Iraq or Afghanistan, or cities in Iraq or Afghanistan. And then I hired special effects people that would make things blow up. And then I hired actors and actresses to role play. So this is what it looked like. A SEAL platoon would go into a building to clear a room, and boom, there'd be a big explosion. And they'd get hit in the face with pieces of foam. And there'd be a bunch of smoke in the room now. And as the smoke started to clear a little bit, they'd hear screaming. They'd look down on the ground, and there'd be a guy on the ground with no leg. And there'd be blood spraying everywhere. It'd be fake blood. And it would be an amputee actor. But believe me, it would get the adrenaline flowing. And now as this guy's screaming, all of a sudden another door would open up, and out would walk 3 middle-aged Arabic women. And they would start screaming at the top of their lungs in a different language. And as that's going on, explosions would start happening, and then I would start to shoot everybody with paintball. So you're going to have problems. You're going to have problems on the battlefield. You're going to have problems in business. You're going to have problems in life. And because of Murphy's Law, these problems are all going to come at you at the same time. And so I would watch what these young SEALs would do to try and solve these problems. And they'd run to the wounded guy and try and help him. Then they'd try and figure out what to do with these Arabic women. Then they'd go and try and figure out where all their troops were. Then they're trying to figure out where they're getting shot at from. Then they'd go back to the wounded guy. Then back to the civilian women. Then back to the gunfight. Then back to trying to gather their troops. And they would try and solve all their problems at the same time. And when they would try and solve all their problems at the same time, how many of them would actually get solved? No. So I pull them aside and I say, hey, listen, here's what's going on. You need to prioritize and execute. When you've got all these problems happening, what you need to do is you need to look at the problems, see what your biggest problem is, and then focus your efforts and your resources on that problem until you get that problem solved. Once you get that problem solved, you can move on to the next biggest problem. Once you get that problem solved, you can move on to the next biggest problem, and so on. And the guys would look at me and say, okay, got it, boss. And I'd send them out on another training mission. I'd throw the same problems at them. Wounded guy, troops all over the place in different buildings, civilians to deal with, gunfight happening. And I would watch to see what they would focus on. And 9 times out of 10, you know what they would make their number one priority? Take a guess. The wounded guy. 9 times out of 10. They're walking down the street, they see Kevin get shot, Kevin falls down, starts yelling, they immediately go run over to try and help Kevin, and what happens to them? They get shot. That's right, because the biggest problem isn't Kevin. The biggest problem is the people with machine guns that are trying to kill us all. That's the biggest problem. And I tried to figure out why these guys would make these decisions, why they would make that wrong decision over and over again. And it took me a while, but I figured it out. What would happen is these guys would get emotional. They get emotional. They'd see the friend, they'd see the shot, they'd hear him yelling, they would get emotional, and they would run to that problem. And so what I had to teach these young SEALs to do, I had to teach them to detach. To detach from the chaos, and detach from the mayhem, and detach from their own emotions. So that they could see logically what was happening, they could figure out what the priorities were, and then they could execute. So detach, take a step back, and prioritize and execute. That's the third law of combat leadership. And that brings us to the fourth law of combat leadership, which is decentralized command. Decentralized command, this is something I heard a lot when I was in the military, something I hear a lot when I work with civilian companies. It sounds like a big word, but it's actually not that complicated. What decentralized command means simply is everybody leads. Everybody leads. And that's what we want as a leader. We want everyone on our team to lead. And I used to tell that to these young SEAL leaders. I'd say, hey, you know that training problem I sent you on last night? And they'd say, yeah. And I'd say, it was really hard. And they'd say, yeah. And I said, it's going to be even worse tonight. You're not going to be able to handle all this by yourself in your own little brain. You need to use decentralized command. Let your subordinate leaders lead. And they look at me and say, okay. And then I'd send them out on a training mission. And I'd start to throw all these problems at them. And as I would start to throw all these problems at them, I would watch the subordinate leadership. And sometimes I would see that subordinate leadership. They'd start to step up. And they'd start to lead. And for a moment, there would be hope in my heart that this was going to go well. But then I'd see that subordinate leadership. And they'd start to lead in opposite directions. Or they'd run each other over. Sometimes they would even shoot each other with paintball. It'd be a total disaster and a mission failure. And I'd bring them back to base. And I would bring them into the debriefing room. And I'd bring that platoon commander to the front of the room. And I'd say, okay, Lieutenant, that was horrible. What happened? And the platoon commander would say, well, you know, I tried using that decentralized command stuff that you talked about, but it just doesn't work. And then I'd have to get a little emotional detachment myself. And I'd say, actually, decentralized command works great. It's just that you're horrible at it. And then, of course, I'd realize I'm the one that's supposed to be teaching them decentralized command. So I'm the one that's horrible. And I'd say, listen, here's what's going on. In order for decentralized command to work, you still need to lead. And the way that you lead with decentralized command is by making sure that everyone on the team understands what the mission is, understands what the goal is, understands what the end state is that we're trying to get to, understands the parameters that we're allowed to work within. And most important, they need to understand why we're doing what we're doing. That's the most important thing we need to understand, is why we're doing what we're doing. Because if we don't understand why we're doing what we're doing, we can't make any adjustments. You're not leading robots. You can program a robot to do a certain thing. You can't program a person. And if you do program a person, they can't make any adaptations when they need to. So what we need to do is make sure that everybody on the team not just understands what to do, because we're not robots. What they need to understand is what to do and why we are doing it. You have to connect that. You know, I live in Southern California. I got 3 daughters and 1 son. The son. Right? You're in Southern California, you're going to ride a skateboard. If I tell my son, hey son, when you ride a skateboard, you're 8 years old, when you ride a skateboard, wear a helmet. What's he going to say?
Sure.
He's going to say no to me. He's not that stupid.
Attachment.
Well, what about when I'm not there? Because let's face it, we're not a cool guy if we're wearing a helmet. But I told him what to do. I told him what to do. He goes around the corner, helmet's coming off. Now, what if I said, hey son, when you wear a skateboard, I want you to wear a helmet. And here's why. And I take him to a hospital. And I introduce him to a little kid laying in a bed that's 10 years old that has brain damage because he wasn't wearing a helmet. Or I show him an article about a kid that died from riding a skateboard because he wasn't wearing a helmet. This is why I want you to wear a helmet. Do you understand? Now, not only do you have a kid that's wearing a helmet, but he's Get his friends to wear helmets. So we have to not just explain what to do, but why we are doing it. And that is a necessity if you want people on your team to be able to step up and lead through decentralized command. So, those are the 4 laws of combat leadership. They're actually pretty straightforward. This thing I'm about to talk about is a little bit harder sometimes for people to get their minds around. It's called the dichotomy of leadership. And what this is opposing forces that are pulling you as a leader in opposite directions. And both directions you're getting pulled in are correct. Well, what do I mean by that? Let me give you an example. Decentralized command, which I just talked about. Hey, decentralized command, let your subordinate leaders lead. But the first book I wrote about leadership was called Extreme Ownership. I want you to own everything. So which one is it? You want me to let my subordinate leaders lead, or you want me to own everything? Yeah. And the answer is, and this is the same answer for all these dichotomies. You have to do both. You have to be balanced. We have to be balanced as a leader. And we've got to balance between these opposing forces. Calm. I just talked about detaching from your emotions. So you got to be calm. But am I saying be devoid of emotions? No. You got to be calm but not robotic. What about this one? Courageous. Yeah, you got to be courageous. You got to take risk in the business world. But at the same time, you have to be cautious. You can't just throw caution to the wind. Got to compete, right? But at the same time, we don't undermine people that are on our team. Got to be humble. Talk about humility a lot. I'm going to talk about it more. But at the same time, we have to be confident. So these are all dichotomies that we have to balance. And here's a really simple one. Leader has to talk, right? Leader has to communicate. Is it possible for a leader to communicate too much?
No.
Yes, it is. If you've ever had a leader that sent you 47 emails before 5 o'clock in the morning, you don't even know which ones to read. You can't read them all. Communicating too much. Is it possible for a leader to communicate too little? Yes, it is. Now the team doesn't know what's happening. So with all these dichotomies, what you have to do is you have to be balanced. And there's an infinite number of these. I want to talk about my personal favorite of these. My personal favorite of these dichotomies is discipline and freedom. On the one side, you've got discipline, which is a rigid, structured way of doing things. On the other side, you've got freedom, which is we do whatever we want. And what does everybody want out of those two? Freedom. Of course, everybody wants freedom. But what's interesting about this dichotomy is if you want freedom, the way that you get to freedom is through discipline. On a personal level, you all work in the business where you're trying to give people financial freedom. How do you get financial freedom? Discipline. You gotta have financial discipline. You gotta have the discipline to work hard. You gotta have the discipline to save your money. You gotta have the discipline to invest your money properly. You gotta have the discipline not to buy stupid things that you don't even need. And as you all know, if you have that kind of financial discipline, you'll end up with financial freedom. What about free time? Everybody wants more free time. How do we get more free time? More disciplined time management. Having the discipline to make a schedule. Having the discipline to stick to that schedule. Having the discipline to get to wake up earlier in the morning. Having the discipline to say no to things that are a complete waste of your time. And if you have that kind of disciplined time management, you will end up with more free time. And this happens not just with our personal lives, it happens with everything we do, and it happens with teams too. And if you saw my SEAL platoon or you saw my SEAL task unit, you would have seen that we had a disciplined standard operating procedure for just about everything that we did. From the way we lined up our vehicles, the way we loaded our vehicles, the way we offloaded our vehicles, the way we approached a target, the way we entered a building. Just about everything we did, we had a disciplined standard operating procedure for. And you might think that that would constrain us out on the battlefield. But the opposite is actually true. The opposite is actually true. Because we had discipline, it gave us freedom. Because if I wanted Kevin to go take down a building we hadn't planned to take down, I could just say, Kevin, go take down that building over there. And he'd say, cool, got it. He didn't need to tell me who he was going to take with him or what kind of weapons they were going to use or how they were going to get into the building. He didn't need to tell me any of that because we already knew. And his team already knew too. So I could just say, Kevin, go hit that building, you go to that building, you go to that building. And we could do this rapidly because we had discipline. Now, is it possible for a team or an organization to have too much discipline and too much structure? Yes, it is. Even that can get out of balance. And sometimes I work with companies or I work with military units, and they have so much process in place and so many standard operating procedures in place that no one can move anymore. And when they can't move, they actually stop thinking. And now we have a disaster on our hands. So even with this dichotomy, we have to be balanced. We have to give people enough discipline and structure that they know what they're supposed to do, but still enough freedom to make adaptations if they need to. This is why I need to mention, I used to get these young SEAL leaders, and there would be a problem in a building, and they'd kind of walk up towards that building, and they'd kind of like look in the building, there'd be a bunch of paintball flying around, and they'd back away from that building. And I would walk up behind them, and I would gently put my hand in the back, and I would move them back towards the problem. And I would whisper gently in their ear, hey buddy, that problem in the building is not going to solve itself. You got to go solve that problem. You got to get aggressive. You got to be default aggressive. That's got to be your default mode, is to go and make things happen. The good business deal that you expect to come and knock on your door tomorrow is not going to happen. You have to make it happen. The change that you want in your life, it's not going to change by itself. You have to make it happen. So keep this in mind. You know, the Marine Corps has a similar saying, it's bias for action. Meaning, hey, if I'm not sure what to do, my bias is to take action. It's the same thing. You hear some business people, I want to be proactive, not reactive. It's the same thing. Neither one of those are quite the same thing. This is a little bit stronger. And the reason I still use that terminology is because when you get into really bad situations like SEALs often get put into, the tendency to freeze up, the tendency not to take action is a very strong tendency. And so I had to give them some verbiage to remind them that would help them overcome that tendency. And it's the same thing in life. Most of us know what we have to do. We know what we should do, but we don't take action. So don't allow that to happen. Get default aggressive and make it happen. Often asked, what's the most important characteristic for a leader to have? And this is a very simple answer for me to give. It's humility. It's humility. And the reason I know this is because when we would fire a SEAL leader from my training blocks, when we would remove a SEAL leader from a leadership position, we would fire that SEAL leader not because he didn't know how to shoot his gun, not because he wasn't in good physical condition, not because he didn't know how to read a map. We would fire that SEAL leader because they lacked humility. Because think about what it does to your mindset when you lack humility. You don't listen to anybody else. You don't listen to your subordinates because what do they know? You don't listen to your peers because you think you're better than them. You don't even listen to your boss anymore because what does my boss know? He's up in an ivory tower. So if you lack humility, you don't listen to anybody. If you don't listen to anybody, you can't make any changes. The other thing that we got to watch out for, if we're not humble, we don't respect our enemy. We don't respect our competitors. And when we don't respect our competitors, that's when we don't train, that's when we cut corners, that's when we don't prepare. And when we don't prepare, and we don't train, and when we cut corners, that's when we get caught. That's when we lose. And that stems from a lack of humility. And the worst thing about someone that can't keep their ego in check is when they look in the mirror. When you look in the mirror, you can't even do a good assessment of yourself and see where your shortfalls are so that you can improve as a leader and as a person. And if you're not trying to improve as a leader or as a person, the rest of the world is going to pass you by. So you have to stay humble. And this brings me to the last thing I want to talk about, and then we're going to do some Q&A. So, this is the name of the first book that I wrote about leadership. The name is Extreme Ownership. The reason we called the book Extreme Ownership is because when we work with military leaders and military teams and civilian leaders and civilian teams, this was the attitude that was the difference between the winning teams and the winning leaders and the losing teams and the losing leaders. This is the difference. And this was so obvious when I was running that SEAL training, and what made it so obvious is I got to see the contrast between good SEAL leaders and bad SEAL leaders. And I'll tell you exactly what it looked like. It looked like this. So let's say I had a bad SEAL leader coming through my training program. And he would bring his platoon out to one of my training sites. And I would send them out on a training mission. And everything would be a disaster. Everything shot with paintball. They failed to complete the mission. I bring them back to the debriefing room. I bring that bad SEAL leader up to the front of the room. And I say, okay, Lieutenant, that was absolutely pathetic. What happened? And the bad SEAL leader would stand up and say, well, first of all, assault team leader, you didn't bring enough people for that target. You didn't do a good target study. You didn't realize how big that target was, so you didn't bring enough people. It took you forever to clear the target. And then mobility commander here in charge of the Humvees, you didn't know where to come pick us up. That's the only piece of information that you needed, and you didn't have it. And then, sniper team leader?
Yeah, cool.
Sniper team leader, yeah, sounds real cool, doesn't it? And it would have been cool, but you didn't tell me where you were. You didn't report your position. And when you didn't report your position, it caused all kinds of confusion. So if we're going to do any better as a platoon, you better figure out how to do your job. You better get a grip on reality, and you better square yourself away. And I'd be sitting there listening to this debrief. Anyone notice anything peculiar about this debrief?
Everybody else.
None of it was my fault. None of it was my fault. No. It was your fault. It was your fault. It was your fault. And what happens to you or you or you or anyone in this room when I point my finger at you and I start blaming you, what's your natural reaction going to be?
Defensive.
You're going to get defensive. And when you get defensive, you know what you do? You start pointing your finger at someone else. And what you end up with is a team where everyone on the team is pointing their fingers at each other. No one is taking ownership of the problems, and therefore the problems don't get solved. And this team is never going to improve. And they certainly are not going to become exceptional. Now you compare that with a good SEAL leader. I'd have a good SEAL leader coming through my program. And I would take him and his platoon and put them out on a training mission, and it would go just as bad. Everyone gets shot with paintball, they don't complete the mission, it's confusion and chaos. I bring them back to the debriefing room. I bring that good SEAL leader to the front of the room, and I say to him, hey, that was pathetic. What went wrong? And the good SEAL leader stands up and says, okay, let me tell you what I saw from my perspective. First of all, assault team leader, I didn't give you the people that you needed. I should have sat down with you for a few minutes and made sure you realized how big that target was, and make sure you had the people you needed so you could clear it in an efficient amount of time. Next time I'll get with you and make sure you have that. And then mobility commander in charge of the Humvees, somehow you came to my brief that I'm responsible for, and I failed as a leader to convey to you the one piece of information that you needed, and that was where to come pick us up. Next time I'll get with you after the brief and make sure you know exactly where to come pick us up. And then sniper team leader, I lost track of where you were. I didn't know where you and your team were, and that's probably In fact, it is my most important job as a combat leader is to know where all my people were, and I didn't know where you were. And that caused a lot of confusion. Next time, I'm going to create a chart, and we're going to have some checkpoints along the way so I know where you and your team are at all times. So those are the things that I'm going to do different so that we all do a better job next time. It's a totally different debrief, right? And you might think to yourself that now the team points their finger back at me and they say, "You're darn right, Jocko, this is all your fault." But you know what? They don't do that. They don't do that. Instead, the assault team leader says, "Hey, boss, I rounded down the number of people I thought I was going to need. I knew how big the target was. I just wanted to give some guys some rest. That is not on you. That's on me. Next time, I will have the right amount of people." And then the mobility commander says, "Boss, there's only one piece of information I needed for this operation, and I didn't have it. That is embarrassing. You don't need to hold my hand. I will handle this next time. I will know exactly where to pick you up. And not only will I know, everyone on my team will know." And then the sniper team leader says, "Boss, the reason you didn't know where I was, it's because I didn't know where I was. I got lost. Next time I'm bringing a GPS, a backup GPS, a map and compass. I'll triangulate and I'll make sure I know where I am. And I promise you will know exactly where me and my team are at all times." And you can see what we have now is a team where everyone on the team is taking ownership of the problems. And when that happens, guess what? The problems get solved. And this team will become exceptional. Now, you see that last note up there? It says it's about you. And there's a reason it's in red. And there's a reason I'm talking about it right now. Because here's what happens. Sometimes I get done talking to a company or talking to an organization like this, and I'm sitting down talking with people afterwards, and someone almost guaranteed to come up to me and say, "Hey, Jocko, I really liked your brief today, and I really liked what you had to say. And I really wish I would have brought my team. Because if my team would just take ownership, we'd be good to go." And then someone else comes up to me, and they're a little bit more paranoid, and they say, "Hey, Jocko, hey, I really liked your brief today, and I really liked what you said about ownership. And I really hope my boss was paying attention. Because if my boss would just take ownership, we'd be good to go." So I'm going to tell you right now, I'm not talking about your team. And I'm not talking about your boss. I'm talking about you. And if you start to take ownership of what is going on in your world, other people will start to take ownership as well, and this will start to spread throughout your family, throughout your organization, throughout your team. And it will become the culture inside your family, inside your team, inside your company. And you know what I know as I said that, there's someone sitting in the back like, "Oh yeah, Jocko's up there saying everyone's going to take ownership. Jocko doesn't know about Fred over here." Because Fred never wants to take responsibility for anything. And you know what? That's actually correct. It's correct. Every organization, every company, every team, there's a bell curve in there. And you got some people at the top of the bell curve that are going to start taking ownership and making things happen, and they're going to live it. And you got some people in the middle that are going to do a solid job. They're going to take ownership of a lot of stuff. They're going to see you. They're going to follow that lead. And you're going to have some slugs at the bottom end of the bell curve that don't want to take ownership. There's going to be a few people like that. There's a few people like that in a SEAL platoon. There's a few people like that in any organization. A small percentage of people that are like that. But this much, I promise you. I promise you this because I've seen it over and over and over again. The people on the team that do want to step up, that do want to take ownership, that do want to take responsibility, that do want to take leadership over their station in life, those people will absolutely steamroll the people that don't. And this will become the culture inside your team, and you and your team will become unstoppable. But all of that starts with you. Now, I'm going to close this out in a few, but before we get there, we got some folks that are going to get out there with some microphones, and I'm going to answer some questions for you. I like to just go ahead and play Stump the Chump. Bring it. So here's some of the topics that we talked about. I guess if you have a question, step to the aisle there, and someone will approach you with a microphone. Looks like we got a few takers.
Jocko, Jason Stas, Knights of Columbus, thanks for being here. I was reading About Face, which is a book, of course, you mention all the time in your podcast, and you mentioned that kind of inspires a lot of what you talk about here with extreme ownership. In that book, he discusses some instinctual moments, right, where instinct helps him to know to call out before he gets blasted blue on blue, right? Are those instincts nature or nurture?
So I was with a small group of executives 3 months ago. And I spent 2 days with them. So it was very intense conversations about leadership. And actually some of the other members of the Echelon Front team were there. And these are all guys that I've served with. And throughout the first day of training, the guys kept saying, like my guys like Leif Babin and Andrew Paul, they kept saying things like, yeah, well, you know, Jocko did this. Jocko made this call. And Jocko knew this was going to happen. And they made me look really good. Right? And I kind of joked with them. I was like, yeah, thanks for making me look good, guys. But that night at dinner, one of the guys pulled me aside and said, hey, you know, we heard Leif and Steve Ward and Andrew Paul, and these guys are talking about these decisions that you made. Jason Gardner, they're talking about how good you were as a leader and how good your instincts were. And, you know, I was, of course, just basking in this glory, right? Thinking, wow, you know, I am pretty awesome. Which is obviously not true. But what this forced me to do is it forced me to think, wait a second, if everything that I talk about is just these, quote, instincts that I have, what good is it? Why does anyone even listen to anything that I say if it's just instincts? And the fact of the matter is, to your point, it's not instincts. It's not just things that you're born with. What it is training. It's training. It's going through situations. It's role-playing with people. It's being in situations before that are similar and doing pattern recognition for the scenario that I'm in. There's a leadership loop that I run when I'm trying to make a decision in my own head. And I can go through with you. The first thing I think about is time. Like, how much time do we have? Because sometimes time is critical. We've got to make a decision now. Sometimes it doesn't really matter. Cool. That's the first thing I think about, and I always refer back to it. Then I think about these 4 laws of combat. Am I covering and moving? Am I supporting my teammates? Is it simple? Do we know what the priorities are? Can my subordinate leaders execute? Yeah, those things are good. Then I check my emotions. Am I making a decision right now just because I'm mad? Is that why I'm saying, let's just attack them now? Because I'm mad? That's not a good decision. I'm checking my ego. What if you have a good idea for a plan, but I say, no, we're not using my idea, we're using my idea. No, we're not using your idea, we're using my idea. So I'm checking my ego. So I'm running this loop through my own head to make sure that I'm making a good decision. But here's the critical part, and this is the most critical part of all this, is we have to be able to detach. You have to be able to take a step back. That's what allows you to make good decisions as a leader. And I wrote about this in my book, Leadership Strategy and Tactics. I was on a training mission on an oil rig. An oil rig is this big giant platform. There's all kinds of equipment on it and gear and pipes running everywhere. It's a very cluttered environment. And my SEAL platoon was coming up to this first level where all this gear and equipment is. It's huge. It's bigger than this room that we're in right now. And all my guys, we come up on this in a skirmish line, looking at this huge area. With our weapons, we're looking at this huge area. I'm looking, thinking, what's the target? What are we going to do? And I'm sitting here with my whole SEAL platoon, and I'm waiting for someone to make a decision. I'm waiting for one of my leaders to make a tactical call. And I'm waiting for 5 seconds. Nothing. I'm waiting for 10 seconds. Nothing. I'm waiting for 15 seconds. I'm waiting to hear one of my leaders make a decision. And it doesn't happen. So finally, I'm a new guy, but I kind of like thinking, well, I got to do something. So I high port my weapon, meaning I point my weapon at the sky. And I take a step back, because I was looking down my weapon, my whole view of the world was about this big. So I point my weapon at the sky and I take a step back. And I look to my left, and I look to my right, and guess what I see? I see that everyone in my platoon is all staring down their weapons. They all have a field of view about that big. Including my platoon commander, including my platoon chief, including the assistant platoon commander, including my leading petty officer. Everyone is just staring down their weapons. And so I'm a new guy. But since I'm looking around, I can kind of see what we need to do. But guess what? New guys aren't supposed to talk. And they darn sure aren't supposed to give orders. But no one's saying anything. So finally, I summon up the courage that I can. And I say, hold left, clear right. And I kind of brace to get told to shut up. But instead, everyone just passes that word, hold left, clear right, hold left, clear right, hold left, clear right. And then the platoon holds left, the guys that are on the left hold, and the guys on the right move and clear it. And then we continue with the clearance drill, and we get done with the problem. And now we circle up for a debrief. And now I'm in the debrief, I'm bracing for impact again. I'm thinking, someone's going to tell me to shut up, you guy, why are we even talking? Well, my platoon chief, he calls me up and says, hey, Jocko, on that deck where everyone hesitated, good job making the call. And so I was kind of excited about that. But I was also a little confused. Because I had zero experience. And all these guys are much more experienced than me, and they're in leadership position. And I thought to myself, how is it that I was able to make a decision and they weren't? How was it that I was able to see what to do and they couldn't see what to do? And I realized at that moment, oh, it's because I detached. I took a half a step back, I opened my eyes, and I looked around. And that right there is like a superpower for a leader. And if you don't learn to do that, if you don't learn to take a step back from the chaos and mayhem, if you don't learn to take a step back from your emotions, if you don't learn to take a step back from your giant ego, you'll never really get to this level where you have good instincts. So, the answer is, it's training. The answer is, it's experience, which you can get experience through training. But the most important thing that I learned to do was detach, take a step back, open my eyes and look around, and run these little leadership loops in my head, and not get stuck on any one thing. Does that answer your question? Right on. Who's next? Oh. Looks like we got one over there.
I'll just talk loud.
Let's try it. I'll repeat your question. Go ahead.
Okay. I've watched the Good video many times.
Good.
When did that first come to you? I have a tremendous respect for the amount of adversity you've been through. And did you also coin the term "embrace the suck"?
So, embrace the suck is a common seal. That's sort of unknown origins. Well, the origins are in the mud, the dirt, the cold, the freezing, the suck. That's the origins of that, and everyone just kind of says it. The good thing, that the little story, if you don't know what he's talking about, he was asking, I have a video that's from one of my podcasts, and it's basically me telling a story where one of my subordinate leaders was coming up to me and presenting a problem with me, and he said, oh, I already know what you're going to say. You're just going to say, oh, it's good. Because that's what I always say to people. Like, oh, we got a problem? Okay, good. Where did that come from? It came from life. I mean, look, when something goes bad in your world, what are your choices? You can fall down and curl up in a ball and surrender, or you can look at a challenge and say, okay, good. Here we go. I have an opportunity. I have an opportunity to make an adjustment. I have an opportunity to show what I'm made of. I have an opportunity to lead. I have an opportunity to overcome. It's something that, to me, there are other choices besides saying that are just non-starters. Everyone's going to have issues and problems in their life, everybody. What are you going to do? How are you going to face them? I face them by saying, all right, good. Here's the opportunity. Let's go. What else?
We've got one right here.
All right.
Jocko, Justin Manning with the Knights of Columbus. Thank you again for being here, especially knowing where you're taking off to tonight. But can you speak to how physical discipline lays the foundation for discipline in business and all the other areas of your life?
Yeah, a few years ago, when I started talking about discipline, there was these people that were saying, there was these scientific studies that were done. And I forget the names of the studies, but the theory was, they were saying, discipline and will is a limited supply that you have every day. And if you use up your discipline, by the end of the day, it goes away. And if the end of the day, you won't have any discipline left, and you'll just fall off the wagon and be an undisciplined person. And as soon as that was, people countered the things that I said immediately with like, well, actually, it's a limited supply. And I immediately felt that was wrong. And I said, actually, no, I totally disagree with that. And everybody knows this. Let me give you an example. You wake up in the morning, your alarm goes off, you wake up, you get out of bed, you don't feel like it, but you get out of bed. You don't feel like it, but you go and you do some exercise. You don't feel like it, but you make your bed. You don't feel like it, but you leave to work early. You don't feel like it, but then you get started at work. So you've had a really disciplined day so far. Lunchtime comes around. You actually, before lunch, you're in there, you're talking to your clients, you're going through the list of people you're supposed to call, you're getting the things done you're supposed to get done, and lunchtime comes around and you walk into the lunch break area and somebody's got, a big cheese pizza and cake sitting out there.
Yeah.
No! Most people, and me for sure, if I'm already on a good path of discipline that day, I'm like, you know what, I'm going strong, I'm not going to eat that. That's not going to help me. It's not going to help my strategic goals in life. So I say no. And I have some beef jerky or whatever. Now, you take yourself through the opposite experiment, where you go, okay, you slept in, you rolled out of bed late, you hit the snooze button 14 times, now you're running late, you didn't get to work out, you didn't get to do any exercise, you leave late for work, you're mad while you're in the car, you show up at work 3 minutes late, you already got to do catch up because some emails came in, you're behind the power curve, you work a little bit into lunch because you're trying to catch up. You go into lunch, there's a pizza and cake sitting there, and what do? You're like, boom, in the blink of an eye, 3 pieces of pizza are gone. So, to me, that physical discipline that you impose upon yourself it builds throughout the day. Discipline begets more discipline. And it turned out, I had these arguments online, not really arguments, but I saw these rebuttals online, I rebutted a few of them, but I don't spend a bunch of time arguing online. I don't think that's a good investment of our time. But eventually, another study came out that supported what I thought. And I posted it and said, you see? So, yes, that discipline that you have physically will emanate throughout everything that you do. And look, it doesn't matter. You don't have to run a marathon. If you get up and people ask, what should I do? Do something. And then people say, well, what if I can't do a lot? Do what you can do. Right? Do what you can do. You get injured? Okay, cool. You haven't worked out? You haven't trained in a long time? Do what you can do. And you will get stronger. It's amazing. The human body's amazing. It will adapt over time. So put that discipline. It's a great place to start every day. No one wants to hear it. But waking up early and working out is a really good way to start your day. I think we got another question here. Oh, sorry, I can't see too well with the lights, but I just one in the back of the room. I would say the gentleman with no hair, but that's not going to narrow it down in this case.
Ouch.
My name is Brendan Hayner with the Knights of Columbus. Taking more courage to ask this question than I expected, but I really want to know your answer, so hear what you have to say. I've always been a team guy. I've been on this job for 3 years. It's my first quoted sales job. And team means, it seems, something a little different when you're talking about salespeople, because a lot of us do most of our sales. Certainly we're a team with the home office, and certainly we're a two-person team with our GA, but being a team with each other, I don't want to overdo it, but you kind of see where I'm going, is that being a team in the sales profession seems to mean something different to different people. Now, when I started, I would have some of the old-timers say, yeah, don't worry about the GA. He doesn't do anything for you. He doesn't affect your income or what have you. And I didn't buy it just out of principle because I came from a team environment. And yet, the perception test that they give for who might succeed at this job scores like attraction to a team environment as a kind of a negative, because they want you to be a solo producer, and there is a lot to that. And yet I'm holding on to the idea, and Benji, I'm not buttering you up here, but if my GA doesn't make trip, I'm embarrassed, okay? And I don't think every agent thinks that way, but I do, and I'm just holding on to it out of stubbornness. But it's a good example of what I'm trying to ask, and I'm not formulating it very well, but I know you've talked to a lot of sales groups, so maybe you know what I'm asking better than I do. What do you say to sales teams that are a different kind of team, I think, than a combat team?
Yeah, and this is one of the reasons why I had that dichotomy up there of competitive, but a gracious loser, right? Competitive, but part of the team. Because I saw this happen with SEAL platoons. Believe it or not, inside of a SEAL team, all the platoons are competitive against each other. They're trying to get to deploy to the best spot. The people inside the platoon, the leaders inside the platoon are trying to get the best evaluation so they can get promoted. So there is legitimate competition between platoons. And I would see times where some platoons would undermine another platoon, which is like blasphemy. I'm like you, that's blasphemy. And what we have to remember is that in any environment, right? Like even in the sales environment where I'm competing against Kevin, we're both trying to sell stuff, we're trying to sell more, we might be trying to sell in the same area, we might even brush up against the same clients from time to time. And so what would make me not say, oh, you know what, I'm gonna unplug his phone. Right? Unplug his phone, not at his phone, but at the wall. So he doesn't even see that it's not charging. End of the day, I'm out there making phone calls, he's dead. Right? So why wouldn't I do that? Why wouldn't I do that? And I'll tell you why. Because you want to know what a team player is? In my mind, a team player is someone that puts the team above himself. And here's where you're going to win. Here's where we're all going to win. Because if I, instead of saying, hey, instead of sneaking and pulling his plug out, instead if I say, hey, check it out. I just got a deal on these battery rechargers. Here you go. If your phone ever dies, you can use this. What does that do to our relationship? What does it do to our team? Makes it stronger. Are we going to do better if we're supporting each other? What if he figures out, hey, he starts working with clients in a certain area and they all give him the same objection and he just figures out how to overcome that objection and then he holds on to it? Going to help him. He's going to go up a little bit. He's going to do a little bit better than me. But if he tells me how he overcame it, he shares that information, I'm going to rise with him. But also, when I figure something out, I'm going to go back and tell him. So what we have to be careful of, this is what it boils down to. There's two different types of thinking. There's tactical thinking, which is what's going on right in front of me, and there's strategic thinking, which is long-term, how am I going to win in the big picture? And you all fight this all the time, trying to get somebody to make good decisions that are really supportive in their strategic life, right? Is it tactically? It's like, I'd rather save that $280 a month instead of invest it. I want to buy stuff. That's a tactical way of thinking. Where instead of saying, hey, save some, you don't need to buy coffee every day at Starbucks, you don't need to do this, save that money and let's invest it, and long term you're gonna win. That's what you all explain to people all day long, am I right?
Yep.
So when we're starting to talk about a team, it is how do we look, instead of looking short term, I'm gonna beat you this month in sales, or I'm gonna get more clients in it. Instead of thinking tactically, small-minded, think big picture. Who's gonna do better in the long run? The team that works together and supports each other, or the team that stabs each other in the back? Who's gonna win? That's why we have to work as a team. Because the team will win in the end. Make sense?
Yes, sir.
Awesome.
Okay, we have another question in this corner here.
Got it?
Hey Jocko, Cameron Ellis, Knights of Columbus, long-time listener, first-time caller. I was wondering if you could maybe go from an experience of a situation that you've been in where you were in a subordinate position and you didn't see eye to eye with your manager, but you had a strategic mission that you still had to accomplish. What are some strategies that you've used in the past to not only complete the mission, but also maintain a good relationship and open lines of communication with your manager?
Yep. So, a bunch of different things comes to mind. I wrote a book about this called Leadership Strategy Tactics. This is in there. So what do? My boss is telling me to do something that I don't think quite makes sense. What should I do? Clearly just say, shut up, I'm going to do my own thing, right? No. The military, you get told all kinds of things that you don't necessarily agree with. Happens all the time. Happens all the time. So, what did I do throughout my career as I had bosses that I didn't necessarily agree with? There's a bunch of steps that I took. Number one, relationships are paramount, so I'm trying to build a good relationship with my boss. Has it ever benefited me or you to have an antagonistic relationship with your boss? Is that ever going to help you? Is it ever going to help your team? Never. Never helps. So I'm going to try and build a good relationship with my team. So, my boss tells me to do something, maybe doesn't make that much sense. What do? Who can guess?
You do it.
I do it! I do it! I do it. My boss tells me to do something that's going to take me an extra 20 minutes of work. You know what I'm going to do? I'm going to do it. Hey boss, here's what you wanted. Let me know if you need anything else. Boss says, oh, okay, great. Next day, boss got something else. It's going to take the team. I have to get the team together. It's going to take us about a half an hour. Boss says, hey, I want this paperwork done by tomorrow. I look at it and say, it's going to take us about a half an hour. Okay, hey, boss, got it. I bring the team together. Hey, guys, here's what's going on. We've got to get this paperwork done. We need to refill this out. The boss needs it. I'm going to do it. I'm going to do that. I'm going to do something else the next day. Next week, I'm doing something else for the boss. The boss is starting to look at me thinking, Jocko really gets stuff done. He makes stuff happen. And then at a certain point, the boss says to me, hey, Jocko, I want you to implement this new program, and I want it implemented next week. And I look at the program, and I realize it is going to be extremely detrimental to my team and our clients. Now what do? Now I've built up trust with my boss. Now I have a good relationship with my boss. Now I understand my boss and my boss understands me. So now I'm going to use, there's two skills as leaders that I think are the most underrated skills that leaders have. Number one is listening, and number two is asking earnest questions. So I'm going to say, hey boss, I got that. I took a look at the program you wanted me to implement. I want to ask you some questions about it just to make sure I understand. If my boss is telling me to do something that's going to hurt my team and our clients, do you think that that's what the boss' intent is? No. Is it possible that the boss doesn't understand some aspect of this new program? It's very possible. Would my boss want me to just blindly say, yep, got it, boss, I'm going to do it anyways, and hurt my clients and hurt my team? No. So, hey boss, I want to ask you some questions about what the intent of this is. Let me give you a real world example. When I got to Iraq on my second deployment, we got told we are going to do all operations with Iraqi soldiers. Now, Iraqi soldiers are barely even soldiers. untrained, poorly equipped, uneducated, not motivated, just terrible. And so what we are told is that we are going to go with our Iraqi soldiers out into the worst battlefield in Iraq, and we're going to have these Iraqi soldiers watching our back. Does that make sense? Well, I didn't think it made sense either. Now I thought about it and said, why would my boss want me to do this? And I realized, oh, they want us to get these Iraqi soldiers trained up so that they can handle the security in their own country. That makes sense. Okay, got it. Now, not only did I not want to take Iraqi soldiers with me, nobody in the U.S. military wanted to take Iraqi soldiers with them. But everyone got that order. You will take Iraqi soldiers. The Army got it, the Marine Corps got it, the Special Operations got it. We all got that order. And so you know what people started doing? Oh, you want me to take Iraqi soldiers with us on this operation? Great. Guess how many we're going to take?
One.
Well, it's got to be plural. Two. So that's what everyone was doing. Oh, yep, we got 50 Americans and 2 Iraqi soldiers sitting in a Humvee in the back. And leadership started to realize, and that's what we're doing. We're taking, the minimum number, 2 or 3, 4 Iraqi soldiers with us. Well, senior leadership started to realize that's what was happening. That wasn't the intent of what we were supposed to do. So then, the senior leadership came up with a ratio and said, for every 1 American, you need to take 7 Iraqi soldiers with you. So, what did that mean? Hey, you know what? In other parts of Iraq, in Baghdad, and Habaniya, in the north and the south, where things were pretty well pacified, that actually made sense. Not only were they well pacified areas, but the Iraqi army was pretty far along in their training. In Ramadi, they weren't, because in Ramadi, an Iraqi army platoon would show up, and 3/4 of them would quit and never come back. So you constantly had these untrained people. So it made no sense, and plus the battlefield was horribly violent. So it made no sense, and most of the Iraqi platoons we were working with, most of them deserted. So we'd have like 15 or 20 guys in the platoon. So how many SEALs did that mean we could bring? 2. So now, who am I going to send? I need a leader. I need a radio man to talk to the aircraft and talk to the tanks. I need machine gunners, because somebody's got to put down suppressive fire to cover and move. I need a medic in case someone gets shot. I need explosive ordnance disposal in case there's a bomb or roadside bomb. So who am I supposed to leave behind? And if I only send 2 of them, I'm giving up so much tactical advantage. This doesn't make any sense. Exactly what you're talking about. It didn't make any sense. So what did I do? I wrote a very simple, clear, and concise email up my chain of command and said, hey boss, here's the situation on the ground. This is the number of Americans that are wounded and killed every day. This is the amount of Iraqis that we are generally working with in platoons. This is the minimum number of SEALs that I think I should send out in the field in order to be safe. Can I please get a waiver on this? And you know what my boss said? He said, yeah. I don't want you to be stupid. Now, why did he say yes to me so easily? I had such a good relationship with him. We had done all these little silly things that we got told to do all along the way. I had trust. And then once I explained to them the actual vision and the intent, they understood. So I can about guarantee that no boss in the world wants to lose money, wants to create a bad environment for the team, and wants to harm clients. Is there a chance that you ask the question up the chain of command and say, hey boss, this program doesn't make any sense, and the boss says, actually, there's a new regulation coming out, and this is what we're going to have to do, so we're trying to prepare for it. You go, okay, thanks, now I can tell the team what's going on. There's a chance that happens. There's a chance your boss is right. There's also a chance that your boss doesn't see something that you see. So let's form that good relationship. The best way to get a good relationship is perform awesome. Once you have that good relationship, ask really good questions, earnest questions, and you're going to get to a good conclusion. I lean towards doing what my boss wants me to do. Some people are like, oh, well, that's, you're a suck up. No, I want to win. I want to win. How can I support my team if I don't have a good relationship with my boss? That's crazy. How can we get the mission done if I don't get the support I want from my boss? I'm going to make my boss look good. That's another question. My boss wants all the credit. Good. Give all the credit to your boss. Put your ego in check. I always want to do my boss's plan, and I always want to do my subordinate's plan. If Kevin's working for me and Kevin comes up to me and says, hey, Jocko, here's how I want to do this. If he's got a pretty viable, remotely viable solution, I'm going to say, looks good, Kevin. Go with it. Empower him. That's what I'm looking to do.